Science is more than just formulas, experiments, and the occasional lab coat. It's the exploration of the hidden rules that govern the world and the universe around us, ranging from the details of our cellular function to how stars are born. And today we're going to bring you 100 facts from this incredibly vast domain, so whether you are a seasoned studier of science or just someone with the spark of curiosity, get ready to see the world through a new lens. Number 1. Underwater lava can form pillow shapes. When molten lava erupts underwater, such as at mid-ocean ridges or off the coast of volcanic islands, the hot lava is immediately met with cold ocean water, causing the outer layer to cool rapidly, while the still molten inside continues to flow and expand. In many instances, this creates a rounded, bulbous shape that has earned the name pillow lava. Not only is it a cool geological feature that forms today, but the presence of pillow lava can give us clues into the Earth's history. For example, because there are sections of pillow lava at the Isua Greenstone Belt in Greenland, which was volcanically active more than 3 billion years ago, we can infer that there were bodies of liquid water on the surface at the time of its eruption in our planet's early history. Number 2. Caterpillars turn into a soup during metamorphosis. During metamorphosis, caterpillars undergo a truly radical transformation, and one of the most fascinating aspects is that instead of slowly transitioning from caterpillar to butterfly, they actually break down into a kind of cellular soup before reorganizing into their final form. This process occurs when the caterpillar enters the chrysalis, or cocoon depending on the species. Inside that chrysalis, the caterpillar's body essentially liquefies. Digestive enzymes are released that break down most of the caterpillar's tissues, reducing its body to a mass of undifferentiated cells, proteins, and nutrients. In this intermediate soup stage, many of the caterpillar's internal structures are completely dissolved. However, not everything is destroyed. Left behind are a few key critical structures and, more importantly, specialized clusters of cells called imaginal discs, which remain intact through the liquefaction process. These imaginal discs are the key to the butterfly's transformation. Each disc is pre-programmed to develop into a specific part of the adult butterfly: its wings, eyes, antennae, legs, and other body parts. Once the caterpillar's body has been broken down into its component parts, these imaginal discs use the available cellular material and nutrients to begin constructing the adult form, and the result, of course, is a butterfly. Number 3. Sloths' hands clench when relaxed. Sloths are well known for their laid-back, slow approach to life. They're one of the slowest moving animals on Earth, with some crawling about a foot per minute at top speed, and they have an extremely slow metabolic rate. They also have extremely poor eyesight. Overall, it sounds like they're pretty ill fit for the cutthroat and unforgiving animal kingdom, but they do have one interesting adaptation. You see, unable to actually run away from predators, sloths generally remain high up in the treetops for safety, hanging from branches out of the reach of those who would try to eat them on the ground below. For humans, hanging from a tree branch all day would be exhausting, as it would require us to constantly flex the muscles in our arms and hands in order to grip the branch. But for a sloth, it's actually the complete opposite. Their claws on their hands and feet naturally curl in toward the wrist when they're relaxed, meaning it doesn't actually require any muscle power to grip a tree branch. Muscle activation is only necessary to release the grip. In fact, this grip is so strong that it's not unheard of for a sloth to die and still stay securely hanging from their branch. This is one of the most intriguing energy-saving adaptations, and it allows them to spend up to 85% of their life just hanging upside down. Number 4. You can safely hold liquid nitrogen in your mouth. One of the most fascinating scientific phenomenon is the Leidenfrost effect, which occurs when a liquid is close to a surface that is much hotter than the liquid's boiling point. Instead of immediately evaporating, the liquid in its entirety on this hotter surface will instead create an insulating layer of vapor between the two substances, allowing the liquid to essentially hover instead of making direct physical contact. An easy way to see this for yourself is by sprinkling water onto a hot pan. If the pan is hot enough, the water droplets won't turn into steam immediately, but will rather seem to skip across the pan, staying around much longer than you'd expect them to in such a hot environment. Aside from cooking, the Leidenfrost effect can be taken to some extremes with the human body, and we must remind you, don't try this at home, alright? So first up we have Mythbusters, who successfully demonstrated the effect by submerging their bare hands in water and then quickly dipping them into molten lead, emerging unharmed. Then there is the classic chemistry party trick where you can hold liquid nitrogen in your mouth and quickly spit it out unharmed. However, this is a terribly dangerous way to demonstrate the Leidenfrost effect, and in 1997 a physics student tried doing this and ended up accidentally swallowing the liquid nitrogen, resulting in near fatal stomach and intestinal injuries. So, like we said, don't do it at home. Number 5. Mitochondria have their own DNA. You've likely heard the oft-repeated internet phrase, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, often cited as the only memorable fact to remain after high school biology. But there is much more to these little organelles than meets the eye. Most of the DNA in our cells is stored in the nucleus. However, within the mitochondria lies unique DNA that isn't found anywhere else in the cell. This unique feature has led scientists to propose the endosymbiotic theory, which suggests that mitochondria were once free-living bacteria. According to the theory, around 1.5 to 2 billion years ago, these bacteria were engulfed by an ancestral eukaryotic cell, a primitive cell that eventually gave rise to complex organisms. But instead of being digested or destroyed, the bacteria then formed a mutually beneficial relationship with the host cell, a symbiosis that allowed both to thrive. The bacteria stayed here, then over time evolved into specialized mitochondria, permanently living inside the cells of all complex life forms. Mitochondria's circular DNA, much like bacterial DNA, is a compelling clue supporting this theory. In most cells, the mitochondrial DNA is inherited maternally, passed down from mother to offspring, unlike nuclear DNA, which is inherited from both parents. This makes it especially useful in tracking maternal lineage and studying ancient human migrations. However, as mitochondria integrated into eukaryotic cells over billions of years, they lost much of their original DNA, transferring many of their genes to the host cell's nucleus or losing them entirely. Today, only a small portion of their original genome remains, just enough to produce proteins essential for the mitochondria's role in energy production. One other piece of evidence that supports this theory is the fact that mitochondria reproduce independently within cells in a process that closely resembles bacterial fission. Number 6. Lighting can be positive or negative. As it turns out, not all lighting is made equal. The jagged streak of electricity you see striking the ground during a thunderstorm can carry a positive or a negative charge. The majority of lightning strikes around the world are negatively charged, occurring when a massive buildup of negatively charged static electricity is discharged from the bottom of the cloud to the ground. But not all lightning occurs here. Some lightning originates much higher in the cloud layers, where the positive charge has been building. Lightning that forms from here is much rarer, only making up about 5% of all strikes because it requires higher levels of energy in order to reach the ground. However, this means that when positively charged lightning does occur, it is much stronger, with a peak charge reaching up to 300,000 amperes and as many as 1 billion volts. That's more than 10 times their negative counterparts. Because of their immense potential, positive lightning strikes are believed to be responsible for a high percentage of structural damage from thunderstorms, such as to power lines. Number 7. Venus flytraps can count. Venus flytraps are famous for their unique trapping mechanism, which catches prey such as flies that the plant then digests. But what's less well known is their apparent ability to count. These unique plants have evolved a highly specialized method of ensuring that they aren't wasting their precious energy by snapping shut on non-nutritious intruders, such as a raindrop or a piece of dust that might accidentally trigger their trap. When an insect touches one of the sensitive hair triggers inside the trap, the plant doesn't immediately use its energy to snap shut. Instead, it just prepares to close and waits. Only when a second hair is touched, within 20 seconds of the first one, will it then fully engage the closing mechanisms, ensuring that false alarms aren't causing it to waste its time and energy. As the trapped prey continues moving around and stimulating the sensitive hairs even further, the plant continues its movements, forming a tight seal around the insect and releasing digestive enzymes. Enzymes are thought to only be released after 5 more hair activations, once again ensuring that a false alarm doesn't cause a waste of the enzymes. This is vital to such a plant, as it often thrives in nutrient-poor soils and can't afford to make such mistakes. As for how this fine-tuning works on a more technical level, it's all down to electrical signals within the plant. Similar to the way neurons fire in animals, the stimulating of the hairs creates a small electrical charge that travels through the plant, only triggering the next response when a certain threshold is reached, hence the appearance of the plant being able to count. Number 8. Urine was collected in World War II to recycle antibiotics. During World War II, the demand for penicillin, a groundbreaking antibiotic at the time, skyrocketed as it became a crucial tool in treating infections among soldiers. However, producing enough penicillin to meet the needs of the war effort proved to be a significant significant challenge, as the techniques for growing the mold and isolating the penicillin molecules were not a very efficient process. In an ingenious move, scientists discovered a way to recycle the drug from an unexpected source and increase its usability. What they found was that when a person was treated with penicillin, much of the antibiotic would pass through the body and be excreted in their urine, still chemically intact. Once they recognized this, they devised methods to extract the remaining penicillin from the urine, purify it, and use it to treat other patients. It might sound a bit off-putting to be treated with someone else's pee, but this method greatly increased how much penicillin was available and likely saved countless lives. Narwhals can have two horns. Narwhals are often referred to as the unicorns of the sea due to the long, spiraled tusk that extends from the head of the males. The tusk is actually an elongated tooth that can grow up to 10 feet long and is primarily seen in males, although some females do have smaller versions. Whilst most people are familiar with the image of a narwhal sporting a single impressive tusk, what's less commonly known is that some narwhals can actually have two tusks. This rare phenomenon occurs when both of the narwhal's upper canine teeth grow outward rather than just one, and it's a truly odd sight. These dual-tusked beasts are extremely rare, and their existence only deepens the mystery surrounding narwhals, since the purpose of the tusk itself is still debated among scientists, with theories ranging from being a tool for breaking ice to evidence mounting that it's a sensory organ for detecting changes in the water. Number 10. Cheetahs are so closely related it's causing problems. While hunting and poaching have always threatened this big cat, the newest threat to its long-term survival is actually genetic, a crisis coming from within its own DNA. The main issue here is that all cheetahs are extremely closely related, likely stemming from a near-extinction event several thousand years ago that left the cheetah's population so low that only a handful of individuals were left to repopulate the species. This high degree of genetic uniformity comes with some interesting perks, such as essentially no issues with organ transplant rejection, but this isn't exactly commonplace in the cheetah world, so the cons heavily outweigh any possible pros. Essentially, the species is highly inbred, and this lack of diversity in the gene pool tends to lead to reproductive issues, birth defects, and infant mortality, giving the already endangered species an even harder time keeping their numbers up. Conservationists are concerned that without some sort of intervention, this genetic homogeneity could lead to the species facing a grim future far sooner than expected. Number 11. 4 elements are named after the same place. In the world of chemistry, it's not uncommon for new discoveries to be named after people or places that were significant in their finding, and the periodic table is no exception, with elements named after famous scientists, US states, and several countries. But there's one place on Earth that has not just one element named after it, but 4. Ytterby is a village on the Swedish island of Rosaro, home to a large mine that has been in use for several centuries. Originally, quartz and feldspar were extracted here, but the mine made history in the 18th century when a dark black, unidentified mineral was discovered. Chemical analysis of this mineral over the following decades would reveal several new rare earth elements being discovered. Ultimately, 4 of these would be named after Ytterby, those being yttrium, ytterbium, erbium, and terbium. Number 12. There is a mysterious dark oxygen at the bottom of the ocean. Now, the vast majority of oxygen on planet Earth is produced by plants and microorganisms. However, there is a small percentage of the element that does not appear to be created by any life form. This process is called dark oxygen production, or DOP, and recently scientists have begun uncovering evidence that this is occurring in the deepest, darkest parts of our oceans. These remote parts of our world are so deep beneath the surface that no light ever reaches them, meaning the majority of free oxygen down there must be created by a process other than photosynthesis. The exact details are still being investigated, but it's believed that this stable oxygen can form as a result of several mechanisms, such as radioactive decay, breaking down water molecules, releasing oxygen in the process. What makes the prospect of dark oxygen so intriguing is that it potentially expands the horizons for where life can thrive, not just in the deepest parts of our ocean and crust, but perhaps on other planets as well, whose oceans and deep caves may be harboring far more oxygen than we ever anticipated. Number 13. Bloodworms have copper teeth. Bloodworms, the wriggly, slimy creatures often used as fishing bait, have a surprise hidden in their teeth: copper. While the presence of so much copper would be toxic to most other life forms, the metal makes up around 10% of the bloodworm's jaws and teeth, forming a crystallized mineral known as atacamite. This not only makes their teeth and jaws surprisingly strong for their size, but researchers also believe that the copper acts as some form of catalyst for the venomous bite found in some of the species. Number 14. A black hole can be formed entirely out of light. When we think of black holes, we usually imagine massive objects with incredible gravitational pull formed from the collapse of giant stars and taking up the center of galaxies. However, in an interesting twist, it's possible for a black hole to be formed entirely out of light. This concept is known as a Kugelblitz, meaning ball lightning in German. The key here is understanding that space-time isn't just distorted by mass, it's more accurately distorted by energy density, which can also be caused by radiation in the absence of matter. It would just take unfathomable amounts of it. However, if we somehow had the industrial capabilities, we could form a black hole by focusing enough super powerful lasers on a single point in space. These Kugelblitz black holes may have been able to form naturally in the early chaotic universe, and thus may be floating around today, but we'll likely never know, as there doesn't seem to be any way to distinguish them from the more traditional matter collapse black holes. Number 15. A single neuron can connect to more than 1,000 others. The human brain is perhaps the most complex object in the entire universe, with tens of billions of neurons working together to produce our emotions, senses, regulate our bodily functions, and allow mankind to invent the internet and create the video that you're watching right now. You're welcome. One of the most astonishing aspects of these neurons is their ability to connect with so many of their peers, creating an immense network that allows the brain to make innumerable pathways. Currently, it's believed that a single neuron in the brain can form synaptic connections with up to 10,000 others, meaning the human brain is likely composed of between 100 trillion and a quadrillion total connections. Quick question before we continue with today's video. Have you ever tried meditation, only to find yourself thinking about what's for dinner 5 minutes in? For me, honestly, more like 30 seconds in, they'll be like, detach yourself from the world. And I'll be like, food. Well, it turns out that you're probably not alone if that's your situation. Meditation apps are great, but for some of us, like me, achieving those deep mindful states feels impossible. But what if I told you there's an app that bridges the gap between meditation and psychedelics without you having to leave your couch or, break the law? This little gem is called Illuminate. It uses your phone's flashlight, yes, really, to guide you into a state that feels like deep meditation with a hint of psychedelic flair. You just close your eyes, let the light, music, and guidance work its magic, and bam, you are in a whole new headspace. I've tried this a few times, and I was pretty skeptical, but it's way more immersive than I expected. It kind of gives you something else to focus on rather than dinner. You get a kaleidoscope of colors in your mind, there's a sense of calm, all of that good stuff that you're supposed to get with meditation that I never successfully got. Plus, you could try it for free, so you can see if you like it, and if you don't, well, you don't have to pay for it, do you? Download Illuminate on your phone, get their free 7-day trial, and if you're into it, you can unlock the full version monthly or annual and get a 20% off with the code SIDE. Link is in the description below, and thank you to them for sponsoring. And now back to today's video. Number 16. Pistol shrimps can create temperatures almost as hot as the sun. The pistol shrimp may be small, but he packs the hottest punch in the entire animal kingdom. This tiny crustacean is equipped with an oversized claw that is used to produce a powerful snap. The sound is so loud and forceful that it reaches up to 210 decibels, which is far, far louder than a gunshot, and it's powerful enough to stun fish that might be considering the shrimp for dinner, and it can even shatter small glass jars. But even crazier is that the instant the pistol shrimp snaps this claw, the sound is so forceful that it creates a cavitation bubble. And as this bubble collapses a second later, its implosion undergoes a process called sonoluminescence, creating a brief flash of heat that for less than a millisecond can reach up to 5,000 degrees Kelvin. For reference, the surface of the sun is 5,700 Kelvin. The pistol shrimp is known to use this cosmic claw for hunting, defense against predators, and even for communication. Number 17. Stromboli has been in constant eruption for thousands of years. Stromboli is an island off the coast of Sicily and home to the iconic Mount Stromboli, one of Italy's 4 active volcanoes. Mount Stromboli is a unique volcano for several reasons. The first unique aspect of it is how long it has been erupting, with scientists considering the volcano to essentially have been in a constant state of eruption for 2,000 to 5,000 years. The other unique thing about these eruptions is how generally mild they are. At intervals ranging from a few minutes to a few hours, small explosions and rumbles will occur within the volcano, causing it to spew out jets of lava, gas, rocks, or other debris. Every couple of decades, the eruption is powerful enough to cause harm to a few hikers, but generally speaking, this is a place where scientists can get up close and personal with an actively erupting volcano. Its constant spewing of bright lava has earned it the nickname the Lighthouse of the Mediterranean. Number 18. Almost all vertebrates yawn. Yawning is an odd behavior that we know we do when we're tired, but there are many competing theories as to why we do it in the first place. Some believe it's a method to stretch our facial muscles to keep us alert, while some evolutionary psychologists believe it's a social clue to signal our community that it's time to sleep. But even stranger is that seemingly all vertebrate animals regularly yawn. Not just humans and all other mammals, but as far as we can tell, reptiles, amphibians, and even fish do it. It seems to be an ancient evolutionary adaptation that is shared widely across the animal kingdom, and for that to have happened, it must mean that it's very advantageous in some way, or at least it was at one point. If you're interested in learning more about this, you can go and study Cosmology, an entire scientific discipline that is dedicated to yawning. Number 19. Lake Tanganyika has a high level of endemism. Lake Tanganyika is the second largest freshwater lake in the world by volume, and it is shared between 4 African nations: Tanzania, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Burundi, and Zambia. It is also an incredibly ancient lake, one of only 20 or so on Earth that are over 1 million years old. But one of the most striking features of Tanganyika is its ecosystem. Because of the unique way in which water is fed into the lake and the surrounding landscape, many of the species found in the lake are entirely endemic, or in other words, found nowhere else on Earth. These unique species include around 250 types of fish, a species of banded water cobra, and over 100 unique crustaceans. And the fish in particular have been a source of food for local humans for thousands of years. Number 20. Bird poop interrupted the discovery of the CMB. The CMB, or cosmic microwave background, is a largely uniform spread of microwave radiation that fills up the entire universe, thought to be an afterglow of the Big Bang. It's an incredibly important finding in astrophysics and cosmology that gives us insights into the birth of our universe, but its discovery was almost derailed by pigeons. In the early 1960s, 2 radio astronomers, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, were working at the Bell Telephone Laboratories in New Jersey, trying to detect faint radio waves from the Milky Way using a large horn antenna. However, they kept encountering a persistent, mysterious noise that seemed to come from every direction in the sky, both day and night. They pointed their instruments around to see if it was coming from large cities. They sifted out military radio chatter, everything else they could do, but the faint noise remained. Eventually, they decided to check inside the antenna itself, and there they found their culprit, a pair of pigeons that had made it their home. The 2 birds and their layers of droppings fit the bill perfectly, and so the astronomers cleaned out the antenna and got back to work, confident that the issue had been solved. However, even after cleaning out the droppings, they were shocked to discover that the noise was still present. With everything else now accounted for, it was determined that they were indeed hearing the microwave background radiation of the universe, findings which were soon confirmed by other teams, and for which the 2 astronomers would receive the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1978. Number 21. Nearly all of Earth's coal was made during the Carboniferous period. The carbon trapped inside of coal fueled the Industrial Revolution and almost single-handedly powered the world for more than a century, today still being responsible for more than 1/3 of the world's electricity production. Now, you might be already aware that fossil fuels such as coal are formed from the remains of ancient living organisms, hence the fossil part of fossil fuels. However, what you may not know is that the vast majority of coal comes from a single time period in Earth's history, Carboniferous period. This period took place between 300 and 360 million years ago, a time when the Earth was covered in vast swampy forests teeming with giant ferns and early amphibians. The climate was warm and humid, ideal for this plant life to flourish. Over the millions of years, generations of these plants grew and died, falling into the waterlogged soil and decomposing very slowly due to the differences in atmosphere at the time and a lack of microorganisms that could break down key components of wood. This meant that the majority of plant remains stayed largely intact as they were buried and became stacked in dense sedimentary layers that accumulated into huge underground masses over time, with the majority of this organic matter eventually being compressed into coal. However, in the period since, decomposition accelerated and atmospheric changes made such accumulation impossible, making the coal from the Carboniferous period a one-time geologic shift that the planet has yet to replicate and likely never will. Number 22. Bismuth is barely radioactive. Bismuth is a fascinating element with one of the most unique appearances on the periodic table. Then sitting at number 83, scientists believe for a very long time that it was the heaviest non-radioactive element. However, in 2003 it was shown that this odd metal is indeed radioactive, that its nucleus does spontaneously decay. However, it is so weakly radioactive that it would never pose a threat to humans handling it. This is because its half-life, the time it would take for the metal to decay to half its current quality, is incredibly, unbelievably long. For reference, the half-life of the element right after bismuth, polonium, is 138 days, which means it decays quickly and is an extremely hazardous material. Bismuth, however, has a half-life of more than 20 quintillion years, or more than 1 billion times the current age of the universe, meaning that you can confidently handle it without any risk of adverse effects. In fact, it's so safe that it is used around the world to replace other toxic heavy metals such as lead in some applications. Number 23. Some viruses are larger than bacteria. Typically, viruses are thought of as miniature, microscopic agents of death, and usually far smaller than bacteria. But some break this stereotype. Known as giant viruses, these pathogens can be even larger than many species of bacteria. The most famous examples include the mimivirus and megavirus, discovered and documented in detail in the 2000s. These viruses are so large that they can be seen with regular microscopes, unlike their much smaller counterparts that require more powerful tools like electron microscopes. And one other interesting thing about giant viruses is that they have much more complex genomes than smaller ones. Some species belonging to the proposed Pandora virus genus, for example, contain 2.5 million base pairs, the largest of any known virus. These viruses also contain double-stranded DNA genomes, in contrast to many which only have single-stranded RNA genomes, further showing how viruses can blur the line between the organic and inorganic. Number 24. Luminous plasma can form on the edges of ships and airplanes. St. Elmo's fire is the name of a captivating and eerie weather phenomenon that has fascinated sailors for millennia. Despite its name, it isn't fire at all, but rather a glowing plasma that most often occurs during thunderstorms. It appears as a bright bluish or violet light, often forming at the tip of a ship's masts, the edges of an airplane's wings, or even on a tall church steeple. St. Elmo's fire forms when a strong electric field ionizes the surrounding air, causing the creation of plasma, and it's often accompanied by a hissing or a buzzing sound. Interestingly, this phenomena has even been reported to occur on the tip of an animal's horn before a storm. Historically, it was generally viewed as a good omen, as it could potentially warn of an impending lightning strike, and was thus named after Saint Erasmus of Formia, better known as St. Elmo, the patron saint of sailors. Number 25. The dark spots on the moon are ancient lava lakes. One of the most recognizable features of our moon are the dark patches that stand out against the bright lunar surface. These dark regions are called maria, Latin for seas, because they were long believed to actually contain water. We've since learned that they aren't oceans like the ones we have on Earth. However, in the distant past, they were filled with liquid, it just wasn't water. Around 3 billion years ago, the moon was ripe with volcanic activity, and this intense volcanism brought huge flows of molten lava pouring across the surface. As it flowed across the landscape, the lava settled into lower basins and valleys before cooling and solidifying into basalt, leaving behind huge swaths of dark rock that is on the surface today. So while the moon may not be very active anymore, the dark spots you can still see with the naked eye are a reminder of how extreme its surface was in the distant past. Number 26. Neutrinos are constantly passing through your body. Neutrinos are some of the most abundant particles in the universe, yet they're also some of the hardest to detect. These tiny, nearly massless particles are formed in incredibly energetic processes such as nuclear fusion, which is why the sun emits a ridiculous number of them. More precisely, the sun creates around 10 to the power of 38 neutrinos every single second. That's a duodecillion, which is a new word for me. These particles are blasted out uniformly in every direction, leaving untold numbers constantly reaching Earth, with an estimated 100 trillion passing through your body at any given moment. This might sound dangerous, but one interesting thing about neutrinos is that they have a very low chance of interacting with the matter we're used to, protons, electrons, neutrons, so forth, which is also why directly detecting and observing neutrinos is so difficult. This leaves most of them to simply pass straight through you without causing any changes, and more than likely said neutrino will not only pass through you, but then the entire planet without any interaction before continuing its lonely journey into the depths of space. Number 27. Neutrinos can change flavor as they travel. Now that you've had a brief intro to neutrinos, it's time to learn something even stranger about them. For starters, neutrinos come in 3 types, or flavors: electron neutrinos, muon neutrinos, and tau neutrinos. But what's astonishing is that as neutrinos move, they have the capability to shift and change between these types. This is called neutrino oscillation, and it is one of the most peculiar findings in particle physics, only experimentally verified in 2015, and it answered a long-standing mystery called the solar neutrino problem. You see, of all the neutrinos created in the sun, the vast majority are of one flavor, electron neutrinos. However, once humanity had finally gotten observatories that were sensitive enough to regularly detect neutrinos, they found that the percentage of electron neutrinos coming from the sun was far lower than anticipated, and the other flavors, for some reason, had higher presences. Knowing now that they can oscillate as they travel, the mystery of the sun's neutrinos has been solved. Number 28. There is a disorder that makes you unable to recognize faces. The fusiform face area, or FFA, is a highly specialized part of the brain located in the fusiform gyrus. The purpose of the FFA, as you could probably guess by its name, is to recognize human faces. There is also some evidence that it is activated when someone looks at something that they have a high level of expertise in, such as a chess master looking at a chessboard. Regardless of all the specifics that are still being investigated, we know that it is necessary for facial recognition, as evidenced by brain scans of individuals as they are presented various objects and photos. But as with any specialized part of the brain, damage to the FFA can result in some wild side effects, namely the complete inability to recognize faces. This cognitive disorder is called prosopagnosia, and it can come about as a result of an accident, developmental brain damage, or even a stroke. And it sounds crazy, but people with severe prosopagnosia are literally incapable of recognizing the face of their own mother, despite there being absolutely nothing wrong with their vision. One of the first recorded instances of this was in 1947, when German neurologist Joachim Bodemer discovered a patient of his, a young man who had been struck in the head with a bullet during World War II, could not recognize the faces of his friends, family, even his own face when looking in the mirror. However, as this was one of the only areas of the brain that seemed to be affected, he could still recognize his loved ones by the sound of their voices. Number 29. Gallium melts in your hand. Gallium is a fascinating metal with one peculiar property. It has such a low melting point that it can begin turning into a liquid right in the palm of your hand. With a melting point of 85.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 29.8 degrees Celsius, gallium stays solid at room temperature, but will begin quickly turning into a silvery liquid when exposed to the warmth of human skin. This, along with the fact that it's safe to handle, makes it a perfect science class demonstration, allowing one to hold liquid metal without any risk. These properties of gallium have been known about for quite some time, and allegedly chemists over 100 years ago would use this to perform a parlor trick on unsuspecting guests. After serving their patron a cup of hot tea, they would give them a spoon made of gallium and watch their confusion as the spoon disappeared into the hot drink. It should go without saying, don't try this at home, because while gallium is safe to touch with your hands, you don't want to accidentally eat it. Number 30. There may be planets that look like eyeballs. Eyeball planets are a theoretical type of exoplanet that astronomers believe could exist under very specific conditions. The idea comes from planets that are tidally locked to their star, meaning one side of the planet always faces the star and one side is stuck in perpetual darkness. The difference in light also creates a temperature difference, with the side facing the star hotter than the far side. It's these temperatures that might create a planet that looks like an eyeball, and there are 2 hypothesized types: hot eyeballs and cold eyeballs. A hot eyeball planet would be closer to its sun, at a point where the star's heat evaporates any liquid on the surface facing it. However, it isn't quite hot enough to evaporate the liquid on the rest of the planet, creating a gradient with the appearance similar to that of an eyeball. Likewise, a cold eyeball would be a bit further back from its star, to where most of its surface is frozen over except for the portion facing the sun, which reaches just the right temperature to melt and remain liquid. There are a couple of candidates for eyeball planets, but until we can get up close and personal or directly view one's features with an immense telescope, they will remain a likely, but ultimately theoretical, astronomical body. Number 31. Some fish can recognize themselves in the mirror. The mirror is a behavioral assessment that is given to animals to see if they can recognize their own reflection in it, with the idea that this usually represents some measure of higher intelligence. A simple way to conduct this is to have the animal marked with a small red spot of paint or perhaps a sticker on a body part that they can't normally see, such much as their forehead, after which they are placed in front of the mirror. If an animal passes the mirror test, such as several species of great apes, they will quickly recognize that the red spot they see in the mirror is in fact on their own body and will try rubbing it off and cleaning themselves. There are many animals that have been thoroughly shown to recognize their own reflection. These include several primates, dolphins, orcas, Asian elephants, and even magpies. There are also many that shockingly do not seem to recognize themselves, such as dogs, but this has been hypothesized to be due to them utilizing scent over vision in peer recognition, leading to newer studies called STSR, or Sniff Test of Self-Recognition, which show some self-awareness. Another animal that can't recognize itself is the giant panda, with a study taking 34 of them from a wide range of ages and backgrounds, and none of them passed the mirror test, although some wonder if they have the capability to pass it, but are simply too lazy to pass it. But perhaps the wildest finding from the mirror test comes from a study from 2019, using the blue streak cleanerassa, which are now the first ever fish to pass the test. Cleanerassa are a type of tiny tropical fish that remove parasites and dead tissue from larger fish, and in this study, researchers placed a tiny piece of brown dye on their scales to mimic a tiny parasite. After looking in the mirror, the cleanerassa seemed to notice the fake parasite on its side, and then rubbed that half of its body against the mirroring glass before checking again to see if the spot had been removed. Crucially, to add more evidence to the claim, the fish did not exhibit this same behavior when presented with the mirror and no spot, and similarly did not exhibit this behavior when given the fake spot and no mirror, indicating that they were indeed noticing something on their own body and attempting to clean it off. Number 32. The liver has hundreds of functions. Everyone knows the liver is important, and one of its most well-known functions is the removal of toxins from the bloodstream, which is why excessive alcohol consumption takes a toll on the organ over time. But its list of responsibilities is much longer than just this. At any given moment, your liver holds around 13% of all the blood in your body, allowing it to perform several hundred functions. These include the production of bile, certain proteins, cholesterol, iron storage, glycogen storage, amino acid regulation, and much, much more. According to the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, the liver has over 500 distinct roles in the body, far too many for us to name individually in this video, and certainly more than enough to captivate entire research departments. Number 33. Cuttlefish communicate through patterns. Cuttlefish are members of the cephalopod family and have evolved one of the most extraordinary abilities in the entire animal kingdom, the ability to change the color of their skin and blend into almost any environment with ease, much like a chameleon. This color change can happen in less than a second using specialized muscles that expose varying levels of pigments, allowing the cuttlefish to select the displayed color. However, this ability to rapidly change their appearance isn't only used for avoiding predators, but seemingly also to communicate. By altering colors, textures, and posture, researchers have determined dozens of unique signaling states that cuttlefish use to communicate with each other, a complex combination of colors, textures, posture, and even motion. It's almost like a more complex version of sign language with their whole body, only we have no clue what it means. Another fun fact about cuttlefish is that they can use this camouflaging skill for some nefarious purposes. For instance, during mating season, smaller male cuttlefish are often forced away from the females after losing a dominance battle, but can disguise themselves as females to sneak past the angry males and back into the group to find a mate. Number 34. The ISS orbits the Earth every 90 minutes. The International Space Station orbits the Earth at the blistering speed of 17,500 miles per hour, or about 28,000 kilometers an hour, allowing it to complete a full orbit around the planet in about 90 minutes. This means that as the astronauts on board rocket around the Earth in perpetual freefall, every 24 hours they get to experience 16 sunrises and sunsets. Number 35. There is a gigantic water reservoir in space. In 2011, astronomers studying the distant and ancient quasar APM 08279 plus 5255, located about 12 billion light-years away, discovered that the quasar sat at the center of a massive cloud of water vapor. After crunching the numbers, it was determined that this immense cloud holds more than 100 trillion times more water than all of the Earth's oceans combined. And to make it even more dramatic, the quasar that it surrounds houses one of the largest supermassive black holes ever discovered, weighing in at 23 billion solar masses. Aside from knowing where to stop for a refreshing drink on an intergalactic road trip, this finding is especially remarkable because it shows that water has existed in the universe since its earliest stages, as we are seeing this quasar as it was just 1.6 billion years after the Big Bang. Number 36. A day on Earth used to be only 18 hours long. Around 1.4 billion years ago, A day on Earth lasted only 18 hours, much shorter than the ones that we're used to today. This difference is due to the moon's gravitational influence on Earth, which causes tidal forces that gradually slow down the planet's rotation. This process is known as tidal acceleration and occurs as angular momentum is gradually transferred from the Earth to the moon, slowing our rotation very gradually over time while the moon's increases. An interesting side effect of this is that as the moon's rotation speeds up, it also slowly moves away from us, receding at a rate of about 1.5 inches per year. Number 37. The Earth has a natural nuclear reactor. Around 2 billion years ago, a natural nuclear reactor operated in what is now Gabon in Africa. This odd phenomenon, called the Natural Nuclear Fission Reactor, is the only known naturally occurring one on the planet. The reactor formed when uranium deposits, rich in the isotope U-235, reached a critical mass, causing a self-sustained nuclear chain reaction. What made all of this possible was a unique set of conditions. For instance, the presence of a sufficient amount of groundwater that acted as a moderator, slowing down neutrons and facilitating the fission process. This reactor seems to have functioned intermittently for a period of at least 100,000 years, cycling on and off as the water supply fluctuated. As groundwater would seep into the uranium-rich deposits, the cycle would start, fission would proceed, and heat would be generated. However, this heat would ultimately boil off the water, shutting the reactor until more water could seep in at a later time and resume the process. Number 38. Earth's largest impact crater may be located in Antarctica. Located deep beneath Antarctica's ice is Wilkes Land Crater, a mysterious natural formation that was long hypothesized to be an impact crater, a theory that was given even more credit after NASA's GRACE satellite investigated it further. Unfortunately, due to its location deep under the Antarctic ice cap, we're yet to retrieve samples from the site directly, but satellite imagery and geologic inferences can tell us a lot about it. For starters, the impact crater is believed to be as large as 300 miles across, that's 480 kilometers. This would make it the largest on Earth, more than 2.5 times bigger than the impact that took out the dinosaurs. Even more intriguing is the leading theory that, based on several geologic context clues, the impact would have occurred around 250 million years ago, placing it right at the time of the Permian-Triassic extinction event, the largest and most devastating in Earth's history that killed off nearly 70% of all land species and more than 80% of all marine life. Traditionally, this extinction event, nicknamed the Great Dying, has been associated with the volcanic eruptions of the Siberian Traps, which over many years emitted loads of sulfur and carbon dioxide, elevating global temperatures and acidifying the oceans. However, if the Wilkes Land Crater in Antarctica truly is the remains of a colossal asteroid impact, it very well could have been the true culprit of the Permian-Triassic extinction. One study even suggests that this impact could have been what kick-started the volcanic activity of the Siberian Traps in the first place. This stems from a somewhat fringe theory that asteroids can trigger volcanism on the opposite side of the planet from the impact, and coincidentally, the Wilkes crater is almost perfectly antipodal to the Siberian Traps. However, until we can actually get some more solid evidence and information from this remote feature, most of this will unfortunately remain hypothetical. Number 39. We can scan brains thanks to antimatter. The modern theories of antimatter first began appearing in the 1920s as highly theoretical concepts in the deepest depths of cutting-edge physics at the time. Fast forward a couple of decades, and the existence of antimatter had been confirmed and widely accepted, and it was now known that the collision of matter with antimatter resulted in their annihilation and the release of photons. However, while interesting to be sure, there still didn't seem to be much of a real-world application for these new theories, as it would be far too expensive to create and store large quantities of antimatter. However, as the story often goes in science, these new findings quickly led to some new, useful innovations, particularly in the world of medicine with the introduction of PET scans. Now, you might have had a PET scan before, or you probably know someone who has, as is a common tool for diagnosing and monitoring many serious health conditions, including several types of cancer. But you may not have been aware that this was all thanks to antimatter. PET stands for positron emission tomography, with positron being the name for an anti-electron. The process begins with a small amount of a slightly radioactive tracer being injected into the patient, typically with glucose. For instance, when detecting cancer, most PET scans use fluorodeoxyglucose, which contains fluoride 18, a radioactive isotope that emits positrons as it decays. Whenever a positron is emitted by the substance, it quickly runs into an electron and is annihilated, transforming the mass of both particles into gamma rays that are emitted in opposite directions, which can be detected by special detectors placed around the patient. The key here is that cancerous tissues consume consume more glucose than normal cells, which means that more of this radioactive tracer is taken up by them and therefore is easily located by the higher amounts of electron-positron collisions. PET scans are vital for accurate and early detection of several types of tumors and cancers, and it's all thanks to antimatter. Number 40. Tibetans have evolved better lungs. As an adaptation to living at extremely high altitudes, recent studies have found that Tibetans have larger and more efficient lungs than most people on Earth. The Tibetan Plateau is one of the highest inhabited regions in the world, sitting at an average altitude of nearly 15,000 feet or 4,500 meters, where oxygen levels can drop to as low as 40% of the available at sea level. To cope with these conditions, Tibetans have developed genetic adaptations that allow them to process this oxygen more efficiently. One such adaptation is an increase in overall lung capacity, helping them take in more air with each breath, but they also appear to simply breathe more often as well, taking more breaths on average per minute than people living at lower altitudes. And it's not just their lungs, but their entire circulatory system. In particular, Tibetans produce lower levels of hemoglobin compared to other populations that live at high altitudes, which keeps their blood thinner on average as to not put extra stress on their heart. Geneticists have explored Tibetan DNA for answers and have found several genes that seem to be markedly different from their lowland relatives, such as the EPAS1 gene, which appears to help the body absorb oxygen more efficiently. Number 41. Plants can hear water. As odd as it sounds, recent experiments have shown that plant roots can grow toward the sound of running water, even in the absence of actual moisture changes in the surrounding soil. Scientists tested this by placing plants in environments where they were near a source of running water, but sitting in material that wouldn't actually absorb any water, making the plant unable to detect the water near it by any other method. Plants consistently grew their roots toward the source of the sound, indicating they were responding to the auditory cue of flowing water. This discovery challenges the traditional view that plants rely solely on chemical signals like humidity and moisture gradients to find water. Instead, it suggests that some plants might be able to use sound vibrations as an additional tool to locate essential resources. More research is needed to flesh out the details of this emerging ability, but it seems to be an evolutionary adaptation that would aid plants in extremely arid environments. Number 42. The Sahara was once a lush paradise. Today, the Sahara is the world's largest hot desert, covering the majority of North Africa. It's a harsh and arid landscape known for its endless stretches of rocky plateaus, sand, and sparse vegetation, a brutal and inhospitable environment where only the most well-adapted animals and communities can live. However, it wasn't always this way, and during a time known as the African Humid Period, the Sahara was a vastly different place. The African Humid Period began around 14,000 years ago and was marked by the region experiencing an extremely wet climate with rivers, lakes, marshes, and a wide variety of plant and animal life. It's thought that much of this was brought on by a strengthened African monsoon, bringing huge amounts of rain to the area and quickly transforming it. Evidence of this greener past comes from several sources. Scientists have discovered ancient lake beds, river channels, and fossilized remains of animals such as crocodiles, hippos, and fish, all of which would have thrived in a much wetter environment. Also, archaeological finds have revealed the presence of ancient human settlements with cave art depicting wildlife, fishing, and other activities that suggest a radically different landscape, such as swimming, as well as one of the world's oldest boats. Some of this cave art, found in regions like the Tassili Naaja in Algeria, depict animals that no longer live in the Sahara, such as elephants and giraffes, providing clear evidence that the region was once vastly different from the barren landscape that we see today. Number 43. Electrons are made of three quasi-particles. According to the Standard Model, electrons are considered fundamental particles, meaning they are not composed of smaller particles. They are one of the fundamental building blocks of matter, and in everyday conditions, we think of electrons as indivisible entities that orbit the nucleus of an atom. However, under certain exotic conditions, electrons can behave in more complex ways, and in some of these scenarios, they are no longer described mathematically as a single particle, but rather as three quasi-particles. These three quasi-particles are called spinons, holons, and orbitons, each representing different aspects of the electron's properties. A spinon carries the electron's spin, a holon carries its charge, and an orbiton represents its orbital position. It's important to note that the electron doesn't physically separate into three particles, rather it is split apart mathematically to allow physicists to investigate the individual aspects that start to behave in different ways under certain conditions, making extremely complex quantum interactions much easier to understand and analyze. Number 44. The ancestors of whales lived on land. Whales have one of the most fascinating evolutionary histories among mammals, having evolved from land-dwelling creatures that eventually returned to the ocean. This journey began around 50 million years ago, during the early Eocene epoch, when the ancestors of modern whales were four-legged, hoofed mammals known as pachycetids. These early creatures resembled a strange deer-wolf hybrid more than a whale, but their appearance began to change over millions of years. Pachycetids were originally semi-aquatic, spending time both on land and in shallow waters, but over time they gradually adapted to spending more and more time in the water. One of the key transitional species was called Ambulocetus, which still had four legs that could support its weight, but had started to show adaptations for swimming, such as webbed feet and a longer, streamlined body. Fast forward about 10 million years, and the limbs had been entirely lost, having become flippers, with large, powerful tails, and marking the transition to a purely aquatic life that whales still enjoy to this day. Because there's only been 50 or so million years since this transition, evidence of this evolution can still be found in whales today, specifically their pelvic bones. These pelvic bones are known as vestigial structures, remnants of a time when its ancestors walked and no longer utilized by modern whales. Number 45. The loudest sound in recorded history was a volcano. Located between the islands of Java and Sumatra in Indonesia, the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883 was a cataclysmic event, sending shockwaves through the atmosphere that were heard up to 3,000 miles or 4,800 kilometers away. People as far away as Australia and the island of Rodriguez near Mauritius reported hearing the explosion. The sound was so loud that the sheer force of the wave circled the globe multiple times, registering on barometers around the world for days after the eruption, and is widely regarded as the loudest sound in recorded history. The eruption itself owes nothing to scoff at either, causing immense tsunamis and blasting so much ash and debris into the air that it dropped the global temperature and darkened the sky for months around the entire world, causing vivid red and orange sunsets that could be seen in the background of Edward Munch's famous painting The Scream. Number 46. Most of your body is ancient. It's commonly recited that your body is made of stardust, as many of the complex elements that make up our bodies were formed in the heart of intense supernovas. However, it gets even crazier than this. Because about 2/3 of your body is water, this means that a significant percentage of the atoms in your body are hydrogen, and hydrogen was the first element to form in the universe a few 100,000 years after the Big Bang. This is when the vast majority of the universe's hydrogen formed, also making it by far the most abundant element. So, while yes, the more complex elements in your body can be considered stardust, much of your body is also composed of primordial hydrogen created more than 13 billion years ago in the aftermath of the Big Bang and just after the birth of our universe. Number 47. Each octopus arm has its own brain. The octopus is not only a highly intelligent creature, but also an extremely coordinated one thanks to its dexterous arms. As it turns out, part of the reason the octopus has such expert control of these limbs is that each individual arm has its own smaller brain. These 8 mini-brains allow the arms to act semi-independently from the central brain and enable them to make instinctual decisions far quicker. In total, an estimated 2/3 of an octopus's neurons are located in its arms, a highly unique, decentralized neurological setup that even allows for arms to work together without always communicating through the central brain. Number 48. The Great Wall of China is held together with sticky rice. During the Ming Dynasty, builders working on the Great Wall of China discovered that mixing sticky rice soup with slaked lime created an incredibly strong and durable mortar, which worked well thanks to its unique chemical properties. The rice contained amylopectin, a polysaccharide that gives the rice its sticky quality. When mixed with lime, the amylopectin binds with the calcium carbonate in the lime, forming a dense and compact substance that is highly resistant to water penetration. This combination resulted in a binding material that not only had great tensile strength, but was also less prone to cracking. Ultimately, this organic-inorganic mixture provided the wall with exceptional strength and flexibility, helping the sections built with it to withstand centuries of wear and tear. Number 49. The majority of the oxygen we breathe comes from the ocean. While you might think that trees and vast forests and jungles are the creator of most oxygen we breathe, the true source of most of the Earth's atmospheric oxygen comes from algae, made up of tiny photosynthetic creatures called phytoplankton. These microscopic organisms, which drift near the surface of the ocean in huge quantities all over the world, use sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and sugars, much like plants on land. What sets them apart, though, is that they're incredibly efficient at this process, and because they are so abundant abundant on the planet, they produce about 50% to 85% of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere, depending on seasonal and environmental factors. Number 50. DNA has a half-life. DNA has a half-life of around 521 years, meaning that after this period, on average, half the chemical bonds holding the DNA together would have broken down. This discovery came from research on fossilized bones, particularly from extinct species like Moa birds, where scientists measured the decay rate of DNA over time. As the DNA decays, it becomes much more difficult to extract useful genetic information from ancient specimens. After around 1.5 million years, the remaining fragments of DNA are too small and too damaged to be reasonably usable, making it essentially impossible to recover meaningful genetic data beyond that time frame. This places a significant limit on efforts to sequence the genomes of ancient creatures such as dinosaurs, whose last members disappeared around 65 million years ago. Even in optimal conditions, such as those in permafrost or deep-buried caves where DNA preservation is better, the half-life of DNA means that it would be nearly impossible to retrieve complete genetic material from fossils that old, casting some unfortunate shadows of doubt on the whole Jurassic Park thing. Number 51. Fungi are more closely related to animals than plants. At first glance, fungi, like mushrooms, molds, and yeast, seem to have much more in common with plants. They're often stationary, they grow in soil, and reproduce using spores. However, modern genetic findings show that fungi and animals share a more recent common ancestor, about 300 million years after they split from plants. This surprising relationship is rooted in the way fungi and animals process nutrients and store energy. Unlike plants, which produce their own food through photosynthesis, both fungi and animals are heterotrophs, meaning they must consume organic matter to obtain nutrients. Fungi do this by secreting enzymes into their environment to break down complex organic materials, then absorbing the resulting nutrients. This method of external digestion is a hallmark of the fungal kingdom and sets them apart from the autotrophic processes of plants, which generate energy directly from sunlight. Another key similarity between fungi and animals is how they store their energy after they've acquired it. Both animals and fungi store carbohydrates in the form of glycogen, whereas plants store energy as starch. Additionally, the cell walls of fungi are made of chitin, a tough substance that also forms the exoskeletons of insects, spiders, and crustaceans, while in contrast, plant cell walls are made of cellulose. Number 52. The speed of light can be slowed down. The speed of light in a vacuum is famously constant at 299,792 kilometers per second, or around 186,282 miles per second, but this isn't the case when light travels through different materials. When light passes through substances like water, glass, or even air, it slows down because it interacts with the particles in the medium. This phenomenon is due to the fact that light, as an electromagnetic wave, is absorbed and re-emitted by the atoms in these materials, causing a slight delay in its progress. For example, in water, light slows to about 3/4 of its speed in a vacuum, and in glass it slows to about 2/3 of its maximum speed. However, scientists have managed to drastically slow down light to speeds much lower than these values by using ultra-cold substances. In a groundbreaking experiment in 1999, researchers at Harvard were able to slow down light to just 17 meters per second, or about 38 miles an hour, using a state of matter called a Bose-Einstein condensate. A Bose-Einstein condensate occurs when certain gases are cooled to temperatures just above absolute zero, causing the atoms to clump together into a single quantum state where they behave as one coherent entity. When light passes through this ultra-cold condensate, it becomes somewhat trapped by the quantum interactions between the photons and the atoms, causing it to slow down immensely. Number 53. Bananas are radioactive. Bananas are naturally radioactive due to their high content of potassium, an essential nutrient. Potassium is a vital mineral for the human body, helping to regulate fluid balance, nerve signals, and muscle contractions. However, a small portion of the naturally occurring potassium is the isotope potassium-40, which is radioactive. Don't worry, this doesn't mean everyone's favorite yellow fruit is dangerous. To receive any sort of harm from the radiation in bananas, you'd need to consume around 10 million of them in a fairly short time, a process during which you'd certainly die from a whole host of other factors long before the radiation got to you, such as your stomach exploding from millions of bananas. Number 54. Humans share 60% of their DNA with bananas. Speaking of bananas, we actually share a surprising amount of genes with them, ranging from 50 to 75% depending on the estimate. Now that might sound odd, but it actually highlights a key feature of the evolution of life on Earth. This is because many of the most basic processes that keep cells alive, such as cell growth, division, and energy production, are controlled by similar genes across all living organisms. While this means that we share much of our DNA with bananas, it doesn't necessarily mean we would be similar to bananas in a noticeable way. Instead, we simply share many fundamental biological processes with them, and many other plants and animals as well. The other 40% of human DNA that differs from banana DNA is where the more complex functions come in, such as those that govern the development of the brain, muscles, and other specialized tissues that bananas don't have. These are the genes that make us human and set us apart from everything else on Earth. Number 55. The human nose can detect 1 trillion scents. While certainly one of our weakest senses, the human sense of smell is far more powerful than most people give it credit for, with new studies showing that our nose is capable of detecting around 1 trillion distinct scents. For a long time, scientists believed that humans could only detect about 10,000 different odors, but recent research has shown that our olfactory system is vastly more sensitive. This discovery was made by testing people's ability to distinguish various odor mixtures, revealing that the combinations of scent molecules our nose can detect and differentiate are far greater than previously thought. The nose contains about 400 different types of olfactory receptors, and each receptor can bind to multiple types of odor molecules. When you smell something, the odor molecules bind to these receptors in different patterns, which are then interpreted by the brain, and it's this combination of receptors and molecules that creates a highly complex system that allows humans to distinguish between an enormous variety of smells. Smells on their own are also highly complex. For instance, the smell of rose is a combination of more than 275 components. Even more shockingly, this estimate of 1 trillion might even be lowballing it, as researchers at Rockefeller University speculate that it's actually on the lower end of our nose's capabilities. Number 56. The brain uses 20% of our energy. The human brain, despite making up only 2% of the body's total weight, is an energy-hungry organ, consuming about 20% of the body's total energy output. This might be surprising at first, but it's because the brain is constantly active, even when we're at rest. It requires a significant amount of energy to power the ongoing processes that not only allow us to think and see, but also the many processes that keep us alive, including basic functions like regulating our heartbeat, automatic breathing, and maintaining a stable body temperature. Neurons communicate with each other through electrical signals, which are generated by the movement of charged particles like sodium and potassium ions across their membranes. These signals are transmitted from one neuron to the next through specialized connections called synapses, and maintaining these electrical potentials and firing signals takes a lot of energy. In fact, much of the brain's energy is used to maintain the resting membrane potential of neurons, which allows them to be ready to fire when needed. Number 57. The smell of freshly cut grass is a distress signal. While the scent of freshly cut grass is refreshing to many people, is actually a plant distress signal. When grass is cut or otherwise damaged, it releases volatile organic compounds as a defense mechanism. These chemicals, known as green leaf volatiles or GLVs, are essentially the plant's way of signaling injury. In nature, this release serves several purposes, including attracting predators of the herbivores that are feeding on the plant to hopefully interrupt their meal, and triggering nearby plants to bolster their own defenses against the potential threat. Unfortunately for the grass, in many instances in the modern era, the predator feasting on it is not a herbivore but a lawnmower, and its cries for help are nothing but a sweet scent. Number 58. The first synthetic dye was made by accident. The invention of the first synthetic dye, morphine, was a happy accident made by 18-year-old chemist William Henry Perkin in 1856. Perkin was working under his professor, the famous chemist August Wilhelm von Hofmann, trying to synthesize quinine, a treatment for malaria. Quinine was extracted from the bark of the cinchona tree, and it was the only known treatment for malaria at the time, but it was expensive and tricky to obtain. Perkin hoped that his work in the lab would lead to a cheaper, synthetic version of this vital drug that could be easily mass-produced. While experimenting with coal tar, Perkin noted that his attempts to create quinine resulted in a dark, oily sludge. So, discarding the experiment, Perkin decided to investigate the chemical further. Upon diluting the mixture with alcohol, he discovered that it produced a vivid purple solution. Intrigued, he then realized that this purple dye could be used to color fabrics. At the time, purple was an extremely expensive and rare color, typically only available from natural sources like crushed mollusk shells, making it a luxury. Perkin's discovery would end up making the start of the global synthetic dye industry, eventually making all colors available for far lower prices across the world. Number 59. Our eyes can detect a single photon. While we are typically exposed to millions or billions of photons at any given moment, the human eye is incredibly sensitive and can, under the right conditions, detect a single photon. This remarkable ability was confirmed in 2016 by researchers who conducted experiments to determine just how finely tuned human vision is. The key to this extraordinary sensitivity lies in the rod cells in the retina, which are responsible for vision in low light conditions. Rod cells contain a light-sensitive protein called rhodopsin, which reacts when it absorbs a photon. In extremely dark environments, these cells are so sensitive that they can register the arrival of just one photon, triggering a signal to the brain that says, "I saw light." The brain, however, usually requires multiple signals to confirm the detection, which is why we don't consciously experience a single photon as a flash of light. Number 60. Animals can photosynthesize too. While photosynthesis is an ability almost synonymous with plant life, it is possible for an animal to do it, albeit with a twist. In a rare biological phenomenon, researchers have found that the sea slug Elysia chlorotica harnesses the power of the sun by stealing chloroplasts from algae that it consumes. Chloroplasts are the organelles responsible for converting sunlight into energy, and while the vast majority of animals would simply digest them after consumption, the sea slug has the incredible ability to instead incorporate them into its own body and keep them functional for months at a time. This process is called kleptoplasty, and it's so effective that the sea slug can go long periods without eating, subsisting only from sunlight thanks to its stolen chloroplasts, earning it the nickname the solar-powered slug. Number 61. The cornea does not have a blood supply. The cornea, the transparent front layer of the eye that covers the iris and pupil, is unique because it doesn't have a direct blood supply. This is a remarkable feature, given that most of the tissues in the human body rely on blood vessels to deliver oxygen and nutrients, but the absence of blood vessels in the cornea is crucial for maintaining its transparency, which is essential for the proper refraction of light as it enters the eye. Any blood vessels would obstruct light and impair vision, so the cornea has evolved alternate ways to get the nutrients and oxygen that it needs to stay healthy. Instead of blood vessels, the cornea receives oxygen directly from the air. When your eyes are open, the oxygen from the surrounding environment dissolves into the clear film that coats the surface of the eye, and from there it diffuses into the corneal tissue. When your eyes are closed, such as during sleep, the cornea gets oxygen from the small blood vessels in the conjunctiva, the thin membrane that covers the white part of the eye, as well as from the aqueous humor, the clear fluid that fills the chamber behind the cornea. Number 62. Helium was found first in space. All elements on the periodic table were first discovered on Earth and then later found in the other reaches of the universe, with the exception of helium. The story of its discovery begins with the observation of the sun during a solar eclipse in 1868. During this eclipse, French astronomer Jules Janssen and British scientist Norman Lockyer independently saw a yellow spectral line in the light spectrum of the sun. The line did not match the signature of any known element at the time, leading them to propose the existence of a new element. Lockyer named this new element helium after Helios, the Greek god of the sun, and for a time it was believed that the element could only be found in our parent star. It wasn't until 1895, almost 3 decades later, that helium was discovered on Earth. Number 63. Light can be used to date archaeological artifacts. Archaeologists have several methods available to estimate the age of an artifact, ranging from its context among other artifacts, linguistic clues, or even radiocarbon dating. However, one of the most advanced methods is called thermoluminescence dating, which measures how long it has been since an object was last heated. This technique is based on the principle that certain minerals, such as quartz, trap electrons within their crystal structures when they are exposed to natural radiation from the surrounding environment. Over time, these trapped electrons accumulate in defects in the crystal lattice. When the material is heated to a high temperature, such as in a kiln or in a fire, the trapped electrons are released, emitting light in the process. This light emission is called thermoluminescence and is the basis for dating the object. The key to this dating method is that it measures the time elapsed since the material was last heated to a high temperature, which resets the so-called clock by emptying all the trapped electrons. When archaeologists collect a sample of pottery or burnt stone, they can determine the amount of radiation that the object has absorbed, and then, by reheating the material in the lab, they can understand the material's specific properties and piece together the object's timeline, giving a unique way to estimate its age. This method is especially useful when others might not be available, or if the site is too old for things like radiocarbon dating. Number 64. Osmium is the densest naturally occurring element. Osmium is the densest naturally occurring element with a density of 22.59 grams per cubic centimeter, making it about twice as dense as lead. This extraordinary density is the result of the arrangement of osmium atoms in its crystal structure, which pack together more tightly than in any other element. Another fun fact is that osmium's name comes from the Greek word osmi, meaning smell, due to the pungent odor of osmium tetroxide, a volatile and toxic compound that osmium forms when exposed to air. Number 65. Blobfish don't actually look like that. Blobfish are commonly called the world's ugliest animal for their puffy, squished face and huge, bulbous, nose-looking appendage. It's true, they are hideous. However, the iconic gelatinous appearance that we often associate with them is actually due to the extreme change in pressure they experience when they're brought to the surface from their natural deep-sea habitat. Blobfish live at depths of between 600 and 1,200 meters, or 2,000 to 4,000 feet, where the pressure is significantly higher than at sea level, about 60 to 120 times greater. In their natural environments, blobfish maintain a relatively normal fish-like shape. They still aren't the most attractive, certainly, but they are better looking than the popular image that we're accustomed to seeing. Number 66. Butterflies taste with their feet. Butterflies have a fascinating sensory system that allows them to taste their surroundings through their feet, a process made possible by specialized structures called tarsi. The tarsi contain taste receptors, which are similar to the taste buds found in the human mouth, but with some key differences. When a butterfly lands on a plant, these receptors allow it to immediately detect the chemical composition of the surface it touches, specifically the presence of sugars and other nutrients. This ability is crucial for several key behaviors in a butterfly's life cycle, such as feeding and reproduction. For example, with female butterflies, tasting with their feet is especially important when they're searching for the right plants on which to lay their eggs, as it allows them to quickly assess whether or not a plant is going to be suitable for her offspring. Number 67. Io is the most volcanically active body in the solar system. Io, one of Jupiter's largest moons, is the most volcanically active body in the solar system, with over 400 active volcanoes. This extreme volcanic activity is driven by tidal heating, a process caused by the immense gravitational forces exerted on it by Jupiter and its neighboring moons, Europa and Ganymede. These moons, along with Io, are locked in a gravitational dance called Laplace resonance, which means their orbits are in a specific ratio that causes Io to be constantly pulled and stretched by their gravitational fields as it passes between them. This gravitational tug-of-war causes significant internal friction and heat. This heat generated from the stretching then melts significant amounts of rock inside Io, leading to vast reservoirs of magma beneath its surface. As a result, Io's surface is dotted with hundreds of volcanoes, some of which can produce massive eruptions, ejecting plumes of sulfur and silicate materials far into space. These eruptions are so powerful that some of them can even be observed from Earth with large telescopes. Number 68. There is an immortal species of jellyfish. The Turritopsis dohrnii, or commonly known as the immortal jellyfish, is a unique species of jellyfish that has the ability to revert to its juvenile form after reaching maturity. As far as researchers can tell, there doesn't seem to be a limit to this ability, effectively making the jellyfish biologically immortal, though of course it can still be killed by predators or disease. However, as long as the jellyfish can avoid dying such a death, old age should never be an issue for it, and there may be some jellyfish floating around that are hundreds of years old. Number 69. There is a planet that smells like rotten eggs. In our search for exoplanets, we found numerous odd discoveries, from super-Earths to hot Jupiters, and one finding in mid-2024 only adds to the strangeness found in other solar systems: a planet that reeks of rotten eggs. The exoplanet HG 189733b is a gas giant about 64 light-years from Earth, and astronomers have begun to examine its atmosphere in a bit more detail thanks to the James Webb Space Telescope. What they found was that the atmosphere contained a high amount of hydrogen sulfide, a gas known for its pungent, rotten egg fart-like smell. If you could survive the planet's high temperatures, the overwhelming scent would make its atmosphere unbearable. However, the constant sewer aroma isn't the only off-putting thing about this exoplanet, as it also constantly rains glass, so it's safe to say it's not on a list of exoplanets that we'd want to explore anytime soon. Number 70. Tick bites can make you allergic to meat. This bizarre condition is known as alpha-gal syndrome, and it can occur after a bite from the Lone Star tick, a species native to the southern United States. The tick injects a carbohydrate molecule called alpha-gal into the bloodstream. After the body is exposed to this molecule, some people's immune systems react by developing an allergy to it, and since this molecule is found in many other animals, the allergy to meat consumption can begin. What makes alpha-gal syndrome especially unusual is that it doesn't cause an immediate reaction after eating red meat. Instead, symptoms such as hives, swelling, difficulty breathing, or even anaphylaxis often appears several hours after consuming beef or pork. This delayed response can make it difficult for people to quickly connect the symptoms to their diet, making the diagnosis a frustratingly long process for many. And it's not just red meat either. Some people with alpha-gal syndrome can even develop allergic reactions to other products containing mammalian components, such as gelatin or dairy. The paralysis tick in Australia has also been implicated in this condition, and so far, the syndrome has been reported in 17 countries. Number 71. The Casimir effect creates force from empty space. Quantum physics is so weird that not even empty space is immune to its strangeness. In the quantum world, what we think of as a vacuum isn't actually perfectly empty. It's teeming with virtual particles that flicker in and out of existence. But these virtual particles aren't just vague mathematical concepts that have no bearing on the real world. They can actually have tangible effects, such as the Casimir effect. The Casimir effect is a phenomenon in quantum mechanics where a force arises between two uncharged parallel metal plates placed very close together in a vacuum. What's so fascinating is that this force between them doesn't arise from gravity, electromagnetism, or any other force that we're familiar with in everyday life. Instead, it's a pressure created by these virtual particles. Now, without getting too deep into the details, if the plates are placed close enough to each other, they can create an imbalance in these vacuum fluctuations, causing a pressure to arise that forces the plates together. This phenomenon was first predicted by Dutch physicist Hendrik Casimir in 1948 and, remarkably, has since been experimentally observed to be within 5% of the predicted strength. While the effect is incredibly small, most noticeable only when the plates are within micrometers of each other, it is still a fascinating discovery and reinforces the notion that the quantum world is a strange realm that we've only just begun to explore. Number 72. Beetles are the most common animal on Earth. Of the approximately 1.5 million known species of animals, about 400,000 are beetles, making up about 25% of all known animal species, and they also make up around 40% of all insect species. This extraordinary diversity is a testament to their adaptability, with beetles found in nearly every habitat on Earth, from tropical rainforests to deserts and even underwater. Their hard exoskeletons, wide range of diets, and ability to thrive in different climates have contributed to their evolutionary success, allowing them to survive in nearly any environment. Perhaps their existence is best described by a humorous quote from the legendary British Indian biologist J.B.S. Haldane, who was asked what can be inferred about God by observing the natural world. His response was that God must have an inordinate fondness for stars and beetles. Number 73. Tumors can grow teeth and eyes. One of the most bizarre and unsettling types of tumor is called a teratoma, some of which can contain fully developed tissue such as hair, muscle, and even teeth or eyes. Teratomas form from germ cells, which are the precursors to sperm and egg cells, and have the ability to differentiate into various types of tissues. This is why, while most tumors consist of abnormal growths of a single type of cell, teratomas can produce a wide variety of tissues as the cells specialize. Although rare, these tumors can sometimes be found with teeth, bone, malformed eyes, or other complex structures that make them resemble a grotesque version of regular body parts, though doctors have yet to find one with fully formed organs. Teratomas are typically found in the ovaries, testes, or near the tailbone, and they can range in size from very small to as large as several pounds. Number 74. Lost weight is exhaled. It's easy to imagine fat as being burned off when we exercise and eat healthier, but the actual process of how that fat is removed from our bodies is much more complex. When fat is metabolized, the stored triglycerides are broken down into glycerol and fatty acids, which are further processed into carbon dioxide and water, which the body then gets rid of. Surprisingly, that means about 84% of the fat that you lose leaves your body through your lungs as carbon dioxide, while the remaining 16% exits as water through urine and sweat. So, the next time you hear that someone has lost weight, you can remember that the majority of it has simply been exhaled out of their body. Number 75. There is an opposite to the placebo effect. The opposite of the placebo effect is called the nocebo effect, where negative expectations about a treatment or condition can cause harmful or unpleasant outcomes. This is, of course, in contrast to the placebo effect, which occurs when a person experiences positive health benefits simply because they expect them or believe a treatment will work, such as having a headache go away after taking a sugar pill but being told it's a painkiller. Likewise, the nocebo effect happens when a patient experiences adverse effects headaches or pain because they expect it. For example, if a person is told that a certain medication might cause headaches or nausea, they are more likely to report these symptoms even if the medication they are taking is a harmless sugar pill. It's also been documented that people who are told something will hurt, for instance an injection or a band-aid being pulled off, later report the event as more painful than those who had it done with no forewarning of the pain. Number 76. There are 10 nonillion viruses on Earth. It's astonishing to realize that viruses, although tiny and invisible to the naked eye, are by far the most abundant biological entities on the planet. Scientists estimate that there are approximately 10 to the power of 31 viruses on Earth, or 10 nonillion. To put that in perspective, that's more viruses than the estimated number of stars in the observable universe, which is 10 to the power of 24. These little beings that toe the line between living and non-living are found everywhere, in the oceans, soil, atmosphere, even within living organisms. In fact, the majority of these viruses are bacteriophages, viruses that specifically infect bacteria, and they play an essential role in controlling bacterial populations and contributing to global biological cycles. For instance, in the oceans alone, viruses destroy between 20 and 40% of the marine microbial biomass every single day, helping cycle critical nutrients through marine food webs. Number 77. Antarctica has a red waterfall. One of Antarctica's most unique natural phenomena is blood falls, a glacier outflow that releases bright red water resembling a stream of blood seeping from the icy continent. Located in the McMurdo Dry Valleys, this unusual spectacle occurs at the front of the Taylor Glacier, where iron-rich, salty water trapped beneath the glacier is released through small fissures in the ice. When this iron-laden water comes into contact with oxygen at the surface, the iron oxidizes, turning the water a striking reddish hue. Basically, it's rusting, only the rust is flowing in a liquid. What makes blood falls even more fascinating is the origin of the water itself. The salty, iron-rich brine comes from an ancient subglacial lake that has been trapped beneath the ice for over 1 million years and contains a unique ecosystem of microorganisms that have survived in complete isolation without much sunlight or fresh oxygen. Number 78. Saturn's rings are disappearing. While Saturn's iconic rings may seem timeless, they are actually much younger than many people realize. In fact, scientists estimate that Saturn's rings are only a few hundred million years old, meaning, as crazy as it sounds, their introduction to the solar system came after sharks and even trees. And considering that the planet itself formed several billion years ago, the rings are a relatively recent addition to its appearance, with evidence suggesting that the rings could have formed from the remnants of a shattered moon or a group of icy bodies that ventured too close to Saturn and were torn apart by its gravity. However, Saturn's rings are not permanent, and they are gradually disappearing in a process known as ring rain. The planet's gravity is pulling the icy particles that make up the rings down toward its surface, where they are vaporized in Saturn's atmosphere. This ring rain was first discovered by NASA's Cassini spacecraft, which measured the rate at which material from the rings was falling into the planet. And this process is much faster than we previously anticipated, with data from 2018 revealing that the rings are losing an estimated 10,000 kilograms or 22,000 pounds of material per second, leaving scientists to predict that the rings will disappear entirely within a couple of 100 million years. Number 79. The Amazon has flying rivers. The Amazon rainforest is not only home to one of the largest rivers on Earth, but it also creates invisible flying rivers in the atmosphere. These atmospheric rivers are immense currents of water vapor that form when moisture from the rainforest is released into the air through the process of transpiration. As trees in the Amazon absorb water through their roots, they release it as water vapor from their leaves, contributing to the formation of clouds. This vapor can travel long distances through the atmosphere, transporting as much as 20 trillion liters of water every day, many times more than the Amazon River itself transports in liquid form. These flying rivers are crucial to the climate, not only in the Amazon basin, but across the rest of South America, and the moisture they carry is responsible for producing rainfall far beyond the borders of the rainforest, affecting agricultural regions and even cities far from the trees that originally released the water vapor. Number 80. Africa is splitting in two. Continents move extremely slowly, about as fast as our fingernails grow, which is why it takes millions of years for any visible changes to occur. One of the changes we'll see in the next 5 to 10 million years is Africa splitting into two continents. This process is happening along the East African Rift, a massive tectonic fault line that stretches from the Afar region in northeastern Ethiopia down to Mozambique. The East African Rift is an example of a divergent boundary, where the Somali plate is gradually pulling away from the Nubian plate of a larger section of the African plate. Over time, This rifting will cause the eastern part of Africa to break away, forming a new landmass roughly the size of Australia. Evidence of this tectonic activity can be seen on the ground today, with volcanic activity and large cracks in the Earth's surface appearing along the rift. For instance, in 2018, a giant fissure suddenly opened in Kenya, causing roads to split and homes to collapse in some places, an event which is believed to be directly tied to the East African Rift and Africa's continental future. Number 81. Magnets lose their properties if they get too hot. Named after physicist Pierre Curie, who discovered the phenomenon, the Curie temperature marks the point in which magnets lose their magnetism. More specifically, this is the point where the thermal energy in a material becomes strong enough to disrupt the alignment of its magnetic domains. Below the Curie temperature, the magnetic moments within a material, regions where the atomic spins align, stay organized in the same direction, which gives the material its magnetic properties. However, once the material is heated beyond this point, the atoms begin to move too chaotically due to the increased thermal energy, breaking this alignment and ultimately causing the material to lose its magnetism. Each material has its own Curie temperature. For instance, iron is 1,418 degrees Fahrenheit or 770 degrees Celsius, though it's only about half of this for nickel, and it is much higher for cobalt. And for most materials, this change is irreversible, meaning if the material is cooled below the Curie temperature again, its magnetic domains can realign and it can regain its magnetism. Interestingly, it is thanks to this research that we know that the Earth's core is not magnetic due to its metal, as the pressure generated in the center of a planet is too high, bringing the metallic core past its Curie temperature. Instead, the Earth's magnetic field is generated by the movement of liquid metal in Earth's outer core, a process called geodynamo, but not from the magnetic properties of the metal itself. Number 82. There are some extremely rare blood types. Most people are familiar with the A, B, AB, and O blood types, along with their RH, which makes them positive or negative. There are complex charts describing which of these can share blood transfusions, who can receive blood from whom, etc. However, while the 8 blood types in the ABO system describe the blood of the majority of the world's citizens, it's actually far more complicated than this, and there are some types that are very, very rare. For example, there's one type of blood that completely lacks any Rh antigens. This is called Rh null blood, commonly referred to as golden blood, and it is so rare that only an estimated 50 people on Earth are known to have this type, with it first being discovered in an Aboriginal Australian woman in the 1960s. In 2021, a woman in Malaysia was found to have Rh null blood, making her the only person in her entire country with the type. Another rare group is the P type, which seems to have a prevalence of only 1 in a million. Other groups include the Lutheran, Duffy, and K group, all of which have a rarity of less than 1 in 1,000. In total, there are more than 30 known blood groups around the world, and possibly a few more waiting to be discovered. Number 83. Your blood type can be changed. Speaking of blood types, don't get too comfortable with the one you have, because a bone marrow transplant from a donor with a different blood type can cause yours to change. This happens because the bone marrow is responsible for producing red blood cells which carry the blood type markers. When a person receives a bone marrow transplant from a donor with a different blood type, the stem cells in the donor's marrow will begin producing blood cells according to the donor's blood type, not to the recipient's original type. For example, if someone with type A blood receives a bone marrow transplant from a type O donor, over time, the recipient's blood type may shift to type O as the new marrow takes over the production of blood cells. This change can happen within a few weeks to months after transplant, depending on how quickly the new cells repopulate the bloodstream, and in some cases, patients may even experience a temporary mixed blood type during this transition period. Number 84. Most species have left no fossil record behind. Fossilization, the process by which remains of living organisms are preserved in rock over millions of years, is an exceptionally rare event. For an organism to become fossilized, a unique combination of conditions must be met, most of which don't occur naturally very often. After an organism dies, it typically decays or is scavenged by other animals rather quickly, leaving little trace behind. And so, to become fossilized, an organism must be quickly buried under sediment such as mud, sand, or volcanic ash. This burial protects the remains from scavengers, bacteria, and environmental exposure that would otherwise lead to its complete decomposition. The faster the burial, the greater the chance that hard parts like bones, teeth, or shells will be preserved. Even after burial, fossilization is not guaranteed. Over time, water-rich in minerals such as calcium carbonate or silica must permeate the sediment, gradually replacing the organic material of the remains with minerals. The entire process can take millions of years, and the resulting fossil is essentially a stone replica of the original organism. Because of these precise requirements, the vast majority of organisms that have ever lived leave no fossil trace behind. Scientists estimate that less than 1% of all species that have existed on Earth are represented in the fossil record, meaning we have only a small window into the past. This rarity also means that certain environments, such as shallow seas where rapid sedimentation occurs, are more likely to produce fossils than others, like tropical rainforests where decay and erosion happen relatively quickly. As a result, much of Earth's biological history remains not just hidden, but completely erased, leaving paleontologists to piece together life's history with mere fragments. Number 85. The Moon has an atmosphere. Contrary to the popular belief that the Moon has no atmosphere, it actually has an incredibly thin and fragile layer of gases called an exosphere. But unlike Earth's dense atmosphere, the Moon's exosphere is so sparse that individual gas molecules rarely collide with each other. In fact, the exosphere is so thin that it's basically a vacuum by Earth standards. Composed of mostly hydrogen, helium, neon, and trace amounts of other gases, it's incapable of supporting any sort of weather systems, clouds, or even sound transmission. Interestingly, certain parts of the Moon's exosphere could potentially hold valuable scientific information. For instance, NASA's LADI, or Lunar Atmosphere and Dust Environment Explorer mission, studied the exosphere's dust particles and gases in great detail. Because while it may be basically irrelevant by everyday standards, understanding the exosphere is important for understanding how the Moon's surface interacts with space and how future human activities such as lunar bases or missions might alter or even be affected by it. Number 86. The Namib Desert is the oldest desert on Earth. Stretching along the southwestern coast of Africa, the Namib Desert is widely regarded as the oldest desert in the world, with scientists estimating the area has been experiencing a dry and arid desert climate for more than 55 million years. The Namib's extreme aridity is the result of the cold Benguela current, which flows along the coast and cools the air above, reducing the ability of the atmosphere to hold moisture and resulting in minimal rainfall. Some parts of the desert receive less than an inch of rain annually, making it one of the driest places on Earth. Despite these harsh conditions, the Namib is home to a surprisingly diverse range of life forms that have adapted to survive in the unforgiving environment, including the welwitschia plants, which can live for over 2,000 years, and desert beetles that have adapted to unique ability to harvest water from morning fog by gathering it in bumps on their backs. Number 87. There is enough gold on Earth to cover the entire planet. Gold is an extremely rare metal in Earth's crust, with a prevalence of just 0.004 parts per million. But it's believed that vast quantities of gold lie deep in the planet's core. This gold, along with other heavy elements like platinum, sank to the Earth's core during the planet's formation over 4.5 billion years ago. As Earth's molten state at the time allowed denser materials to sink toward the center, most of the planet's gold ended up in the core. Geophysicists estimate that if all this gold in the core were somehow brought to the surface, it would be enough to cover the entire planet in a layer of gold with a thickness of 1.5 feet or 45 centimeters. However, this gold is far beyond human reach, buried deep beneath the surface and shielded by impenetrable layers of liquid rock and metal that we couldn't even dream of breaching. And so, we'll have to continue to make do with the gold that's available on the surface. But at least it's interesting that nearly all of the gold currently present in the crust has arrived in the form of meteorite impacts in the years after the Earth cooled. Number 88. It is constantly snowing on the ocean floor. Only, it's not the snow that you and I are used to on the surface. Marine snow is a continuous shower of organic material that falls from the upper layers of the ocean to the deep sea floor. It consists of tiny particles such as dead and decaying plants and animals, fecal matter, mucus, small strips of flesh, and other bits of leftover waste that weren't scavenged higher up in the sea. As these particles slowly drift down through the water, they create a snow-like effect, giving this phenomenon its name. As marine snow sinks, it can take weeks or even months to reach the ocean floor, and during this journey it becomes colonized by bacteria and other small microorganisms that begin to break it down. By the time it reaches the deep sea, the particles are often quite small, but they are still rich in many nutrients, and several deep sea creatures such as filter-feeding organisms, scavengers, and certain types of odd fish depend on this falling organic material for survival, making it a vital part of the food chain as these creatures live in absolute darkness where photosynthesis cannot occur. And not only that, but this process is also vital for the global carbon cycle. As the organic material sinks and is feasted upon, it effectively transports carbon from the surface to the deep ocean where it can remain trapped for long periods. This is called a biological pump, and it helps to reduce atmospheric carbon levels. Number 89. Diamonds can burn. Coal and other fossil fuels are highly flammable because they contain a large amount of carbon, a key element that easily combines with oxygen to create carbon dioxide and release energy in the form of heat. It is this fundamental property of carbon, its ability to easily oxidize, that makes these fuels so flammable. So what about diamonds? Well, despite their stark difference in appearance and function, diamonds are also composed almost entirely of carbon atoms. While coal is made of a mixture of carbon and other impurities, a diamond is a pure crystalline form of carbon, where each carbon atom is bonded to 4 other carbon atoms in a tight, extremely strong lattice structure. This structure makes diamonds incredibly hard, hence their use in cutting tools and jewelry, but it doesn't change the fact that they're still composed of carbon. And so, just like coal, diamonds can burn, but it requires extreme conditions. When exposed to temperatures of around 1,470 degrees Fahrenheit or 800 degrees Celsius, in the presence of oxygen, the carbon bonds in the diamond break apart. At these high temperatures, the diamond begins to oxidize, creating carbon dioxide. This process essentially converts the solid diamond into gas, causing it to seemingly disappear as it burns. This isn't something you'd run into in everyday life. However, there are reports of jewelry store fires reaching high enough temperatures to ruin the quality of some of their diamonds. Number 90. Liquid oxygen is magnetic. As you're well aware, under normal conditions, oxygen is a gas, but when cooled to minus 297 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 183 degrees Celsius, it condenses into a pale blue liquid. At this point, its magnetic properties become much more apparent, or to be precise, its paramagnetic properties. Oxygen molecules have 2 unpaired electrons in their outer orbitals. In most materials, paired electrons spin in opposite directions, cancelling out their magnetic effects. However, in oxygen, the unpaired electrons have aligned spins, creating tiny magnetic fields. These unpaired electrons cause the molecule to behave like a tiny magnet, making it paramagnetic, attracted to magnetic fields but not retaining any permanent magnetism once the external field is removed. When oxygen is cooled to its liquid state, the molecules come closer together but retain their unpaired electrons, allowing their collective paramagnetic behavior to become more noticeable. If you place a sample of liquid oxygen near a strong magnet, it will be visibly attracted to the magnetic field, a property that's quite rare for liquids. Number 91. Mount Everest is made of marine limestone. It may seem surprising, but the summit of Mount Everest, the tallest point on Earth, is composed largely of marine limestone that was once at the bottom of the ocean. Hundreds of millions of years ago, during the Paleozoic era, much of what is now South Asia was submerged beneath the Tethys Sea, a vast ocean that existed at the time. Around 50 million years ago, the tectonic plate carrying the Indian subcontinent began colliding with the Eurasian plate. This immense geological force caused the seafloor to rise, pushing the ancient marine limestone upward to form the Himalayas, including Mount Everest. Over millions of years, the mountain range continued to rise, and what was once the ocean floor had now become the highest point on Earth. One fascinating piece of evidence for all of this is the presence of ancient marine fossils at the very summit of Everest, with the rock showing the remains of trilobites, brachiopods, and crinoids, the ancient relatives of starfish. Number 92. Antarctica holds the majority of the world's fresh water. Antarctica is home to the largest ice sheets on Earth, and these, combined with its immense underground lakes and rivers, mean that the frozen continent at the bottom of the world holds between 60 and 70% of the Earth's fresh water. In fact, there is so much water frozen in Antarctica that if it were all to melt simultaneously, sea levels around the world would rise by nearly 200 feet or 60 meters, swamping most coastal cities around the world and drastically reshaping the landscape. Number 93. Brain surgery can be done without general anesthesia. In certain types of brain surgery, particularly those involving sensitive areas like regions controlling speech, movement, or sensation, patients can remain awake during the procedure. This type of surgery, known as an awake craniotomy, allows surgeons to interact with the patient to ensure critical functions are not harmed during the operation, and is typically used for highly advanced surgeries such as brain tumor removal. This is possible thanks to the brain's unique lack of any pain receptors. Local anesthesia is used to numb the scalp, and sometimes light sedation is provided to keep the patient comfortable if they have high anxiety. However, once the skull is opened, the patient can be fully conscious while surgeons work on the brain. Surgeons can stimulate different parts of the brain and ask the patient to perform tasks like speaking, moving a limb, or counting. This real-time feedback helps them avoid damaging vital brain regions that control important functions. Patients often don't remember much of the procedure thanks to that mild sedation, but their cooperation can be crucial to the surgery's success. Number 94. Most volcanic activity occurs underwater. While we often associate volcanic activity with dramatic eruptions on land, the vast majority of volcanic activity actually occurs underwater. In fact, around 75% of the Earth's volcanic activity takes place beneath the surface of the world's oceans, primarily along the mid-ocean ridges where tectonic plates are slowly moving apart. These underwater volcanoes are constantly erupting, creating new oceanic crust and shaping the seafloor. The mid-ocean ridges, such as the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and the East Pacific Rise, are essentially continuous chains of underwater volcanoes stretching across the globe. As tectonic plates separate at these ridges, magma rises from the Earth's mantle, filling the gap and cooling as it contacts seawater. This constant flow of magma forms new crust and contributes to the process of the seafloor spreading, which slowly increases the size of ocean basins. One of the most studied examples of underwater volcanic activity is the Axial Seamount, an active submarine volcano off the coast of the Pacific Northwest. It erupts regularly and is closely monitored by scientists due to its accessible location. Number 95. Chimpanzees self-medicate. In June 2024, researchers from the University of Oxford published their observations of chimpanzees in Uganda, having documented and recorded their behavior over the course of a few months. One of their most intriguing findings was that chimps seem to have a rudimentary knowledge of several medicinal plants, especially those that relieve pain. In one instance, a male chimpanzee had a badly wounded hand and was limping. While the rest of his community was sitting around and eating, he was walking around searching until he found a specific fern, which he ate. No one else in the community ate this fern. After he left, the researchers took the plant and analyzed it, finding that it was Cristella parasitica, a plant with known anti-inflammatory properties. In total, they found 13 different plant species that seemed only to be eaten by sick or injured chimpanzees, and 90% of those had different medicinal properties, such as inhibiting bacterial growth. Of course, chimpanzees don't know what bacteria is, but these findings indicate that chimps have certainly gained the knowledge that many plants are somehow beneficial to treating injury or alleviating symptoms, which is a testament to their intelligence as a species. Number 96. Mosquitoes use 6 needles to bite you. When a mosquito bites, it's not as simple as a single prick from a tiny straw-like tube. It's actually a more intricate process involving 6 needle-like parts known as stylets. These stylets are housed inside the mosquito's proboscis, a long, flexible mouthpart that allows the mosquito to puncture the skin, feed on blood, and inject saliva, all while causing minimal pain so that the host hopefully doesn't notice and stop the feast. First, 2 outer needles are used to saw through the skin and create an opening. These needles are equipped with sharp serrated edges that allow the mosquito to easily slice through your skin without causing much irritation, which is why you often don't feel the bite immediately. Then, 2 other needles hold the skin open, keeping the skin spread apart and creating a stable feeding channel. These needles act as tiny anchors that stabilize the mosquito's proboscis while it probes deeper into the skin. Once the feeding channel is open, another needle injects saliva containing anticoagulants, substances that prevent blood from clotting, as well as a mild anesthetic. This numbs the area slightly, which is why you often don't realize you've been bitten until the mosquito is already feeding. However, this saliva is also what triggers the body's immune response, causing the characteristic itching and swelling of a mosquito bite. Finally, the 6th needle is the one that draws blood, allowing a mosquito to drink up to 3 times its body weight before departing and leaving you with an itchy red bump. Number 97. Your body contains more bacteria than human cells. Recent estimates suggest that for every human cell, there are roughly 1.3 bacterial cells in and on your body. These bacteria are collectively known as the human microbiome, and while they are primarily concentrated in your gut, they also inhabit your skin, mouth, and other areas. The total number of bacterial cells in the body is estimated to be around 39 trillion, compared to about 30 trillion human cells. The majority of these bacteria reside in the gastrointestinal tract, where they perform essential functions. These bacteria help digest food, break down complex carbohydrates, produce vitamins, and support the immune system. In fact, without these gut bacteria, humans would have difficulty absorbing certain nutrients from food, and it was only in recent decades that we even discovered bacteria living within us. However, despite likely outnumbering our main cells, they are so much smaller than them on average that bacteria only end up making about 2 to 3% of our total mass. Number 98. Our sun will become a white dwarf. Some stars end their lives in spectacular supernovas, blasting their material out into space in dramatic, cataclysmic explosions. However, our sun will not, as it is not even near the mass required for such an event. Instead, the death of our sun will look quite different. In about 5 billion years, the sun will exhaust the hydrogen fuel in its core, and as a result, it will enter the red giant phase. During this stage, the sun will expand dramatically, possibly engulfing the inner planets, including our own beloved Earth, though it might not reach Mars. As it grows larger, its surface will cool and turn red, but the core will contract and heat up. Eventually, the sun will shed its outer layers, and what remains will be the sun's hot, dense core, which will cool down and become a white dwarf, about the size of Earth, but incredibly dense. The white dwarf will burn for billions of years, and if our predictions are correct, may one day become a black dwarf, but we aren't certain of this because the universe isn't yet old enough for any black dwarfs to have formed. Number 99. Mars has blue sunsets. While Mars is often referred to as the red planet due to its iron-rich surface and reddish sky, its sunsets tell a very different story, and oftentimes they're blue. The striking phenomenon is the result of how light scatters in Mars's atmosphere. On Earth, we experience blue skies and red sunsets because of a process called Rayleigh scattering, where shorter blue wavelengths of light are scattered more by the nitrogen and oxygen molecules in our atmosphere. On Mars, however, the atmosphere behaves quite differently. This is because Mars's atmosphere is extremely thin, with about 1% of Earth's atmospheric pressure, and it is primarily composed of carbon dioxide. The Martian air is also filled with fine dust particles. All of these factors combined scatter red light away from the line of sight, but allow blue light to pass through more directly, creating a bluish hue near the sun, especially visible during sunset and sunrise. Number 100. Cosmic rays produce antimatter in our atmosphere. When high-energy cosmic rays, charged particles from outer space, collide with Earth's atmosphere, they trigger a cascade of reactions that can produce antimatter. Specifically, these collisions generate electrons and their antimatter counterpart, positrons. These positrons briefly exist before they encounter electrons and annihilate, releasing bursts of gamma rays in the process, and scientists have detected and tracked these collisions, confirming their existence. So, although antimatter might sound exotic and futuristic, aside from the PET scans that you learned about in this video, it's constantly being formed right above your head in small amounts thanks to high-energy particles that originated far away in the distant universe.